Marc Dusseiller. I'm from Switzerland and I was invited here to Videotage to have a workshop and 2 talks. It's the first time I'm in Hong Kong, and so it's interesting for me to do a workshop at different places. Every time I do the workshop it's very different. So it's different people, different backgrounds, different cultures, and so I'm really kind of looking forward to see what happens. So in the first session I show you my approaches in education. I teach a lot in different disciplines. So this is me. My name is Marc Dusseiller, as you have heard. This is if you see this on the internet, it's most of the time it's going to be me. This is kind of my avatar I've been using for the last 10 years or something. Do you know who it is originally? It's Bruce Lee. So this is Bruce Lee. It's from an '82 computer game called Bruce Lee, running on the Commodore 64. And I have this background as a kid. I was a gamer. I was doing all these Commodore 64 games. And at some point 10 years ago, I painted pixel by pixel my favorite character from the old games and use it as my icon everywhere. And this also shows kind of my attitude. I try to reduce things, like this pixelation. Reduction, I think, is a very nice way for being creative as well. So in most of my work, you see this kind of approach of reduction. So this is where I live. Maybe you can see it. This is not really where I live, but I'm from Switzerland, as she has mentioned. This is a house I inherited from my grandfather. It's a holiday house in the forest. I spend a lot of time there. I have internet. I have solar power. I have kind of water I collect from the roof, and it's cleaned through a sand filter. So I do a lot of work up there. I try to spend up to 2 months there, but usually in summer when it's warm. My background is in science. So I was studying material science as a master, and then I went to do more research and did a PhD and in a field called biointerface science. So that's the science that describes all this stuff that is happening at the interface between an artificial material or a device and the living. This is more easy to understand if you think of implants. Say, what happens at the interface between an implant and the body, or what happens at the interface of a sensor, a biosensor that detects, let's say, proteins and stuff like that. My work was dealing with cells, so I built structures. It's called micro and nano engineering, the 3-dimensional environment of cells in culture. So my project was about tissue engineering, culturing of human cells in kind of nano-engineered artificial devices. This is Chinese. Maybe you can read it. Can anybody read it in Chinese? It's old characters. It's from Lao Tzu. It's from the Tao Te Ching. It means that Tao is the eternal thing, and De is also life. And then comes that the environment shapes things, and I forgot the last part. So it kind of describes my approach. So there is the living kind of cells and biology, but then there's also an approach from an engineering and scientist to really structure the environment and the conditions to kind of control or make habitats for individual cells. So tissue engineering, that means you take tissue from a living body, take it out of the body, and keep it alive for a time being. Maybe you can put it back into the body for organ replacement, or you might want to have living tissue to, let's say, test drugs on them. It's been 100 years ago that this paper came out. It was 1912, on the permanent life of tissue outside of the organism. That was a big kind of shock. It was all in the popular press, that you could sustain life of tissue outside of the body. That was kind of a new thing. And this is a microscopy image. At that time, people had to draw everything they see. You see a lot of cells here. They put a little bit of chicken cells in the middle, and then they saw all these different cells growing out. And even then, it was difficult, but they figured out the ways to do that. And 100 years later, we're still not there. It's still very difficult to have functioning tissue outside of the body. There's complexity of the whole body is something hard to mimic. So in my work, what I tried is on an individual cell level to create an environment that mimics the three-dimensional shape and form, the mechanics and the chemistry of an individual cell. So, and most important, instead of just having it growing in a petri dish, I tried to make three-dimensional structures for them. And what came out of it is like high-tech microscopy images of a cell. This is one single cell. In blue you see the nucleus that lives in a tiny little square hole. I don't know why should you put a square hole, but it was just a try to figure out how these like shapes and geometries and forces influence like the life of these individual cells. So that's my background in research. Then about 3 years ago I stopped doing research and I started to get more involved in cultural organizations and teaching. So I see myself now as a transdisciplinary scholar and artist. I teach at different universities in Basel, in Zurich, and in ETH Zurich, and run this like workshops for like children with the Swiss Mechatronic Art Society. And I work a lot in communication, like in art and science communication, art and technology. I run a festival with some friends, of course. It's always like collective people. And we also run a media art space called Doc 18. In all my teachings, maybe one of thing I always do as well is that I try to do things like with hands-on like experiences for learning. So if Confucius said, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So I think this kind of describes the approach I have to teaching as well. So we are going to also do things later on. I think that's important to learn about microscopic animals. So these are like an overview of this teaching. I teach like wood carving and ironsmithing in ETH, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, which is like a top-notch university, and maybe this is the funniest course they have. For material scientists, I think it's important to once in your life just hammer on a piece of iron. I teach with children for like, you know, kind of art, for technology, like have them getting more interested in technology and science. I've been teaching with like artists in Taiwan last year, and I've been recently also did some workshops in more developing countries like Indonesia. This festival I've been doing is called DIY Festival. So it's like do it yourself. So it's all this like kind of, some people maybe not considering an art form. It's all these geeks just like soldering stuff together that's blinking and having fun. So it's kind of a very low profile meeting of local peoples. It's not very international. This is the Doc 18, the room for media cultures. We do a lot of net art and live performances from remote places through the internet, and it's kind of a bar as well. And together with some artists, Jill Scott, I've been collaborating on installations, helping her like doing it. And this is why I'm here, because we have just set up it in Australia. This is Jill Scott's work about her collaboration with the neuroscience lab about eye diseases. So we built together this structure, and it's got projections, it's got TV, it's like massive electronics in there. And so on my way back, I had the luck to come here. As an artist, I do music for a long time, like experimental electronic music. Most of the time I spent building my own musical instruments. They look like this. This is kind of a... So I built this like trashy musical instruments. You can imagine. And we also have a band called DIY Kamikaze or H2 Ohm. So this is like the setup of our band. We build our instruments live on stage. So we come just with some tools and some resistors. Then we start soldering. It's more like performance than a music show. We never rehearse, so the music is not really very nice. It's very much into noise. So recently I started this biological art project called Hackteria. I'm going to talk about that later. And I did some like movies and animations, like this one also, like 4 kilobytes, but it won me a prize, so it's nice. It's everything Hollywood can tell us in 10 seconds and 4 kilobytes.